We're starting. We're good. Is it streaming? Can you hear me? Yep. Yep. All right. I guess we're good to go. We're going to go forward as if we are. It'll be great. Let's see. My wife Christina is helping us out again tonight as we're talking about marriage. Tonight we're talking specifically about respect, following up from Sunday morning. Doc was having some sort of an issue with microphone just a moment ago, so he just stepped away to go find something to resolve his issue. He'll be joining us shortly. As usual, we've got our attendance form. If you're new here, if you haven't done this before, we just pass this around just so we can kind of track and see what people are doing, where they're going, so we can keep up with what's happening, okay? So we're going to pass this around. If your name isn't on here, it's all in alphabetical order according to your last name. But if your name isn't on here, just write it at the bottom of one of the sheets. Put your email address, phone number. Again, that just helps us track and see what's happening. This is in our classes because we want to know. We want to know what's working, what isn't working. We want to know what people are going to, what they're hearing, all that kind of stuff. So we'll start that here in a moment. And I'm trying to think what else. I feel like I'm stalling a little bit waiting for Doc. Sometimes he opens it up to see if you guys have any questions or anything that you want to ask. Ben Bellamy. Oh, he doesn't have a question. He doesn't have a question, but he's reminding me that if you guys have questions at some point, if you want to interact, this is supposed to be more of a dialogue on Wednesday nights, and so if you want to interact, you got questions, comments, raise your hand. Mr. Ben Bellamy in the back of the room moves around with the microphone. That's important so that we can hear you really well, but that's also important because people online cannot hear you unless you speak into a microphone. And it's not because they have bad hearing, it's because they're online. All right, so those are the things that we're dealing with. You want to try your microphone out, see if it works?
I think it's good. How about that? Should be going now. There we go. Cool.
There we go. All right. We're functional as much as we can be. All right. Doc, why don't you pray for us and get started?
Father, we are grateful that we can be here tonight. This is one of your gifts. I pray that each one of us will make a good use of this gift. I pray that we will have sharp minds and soft hearts. We love you dearly. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen.
Amen. All right. Talk about respect tonight. We're going to try to cover some things that we didn't get to talk too much or talk about much on Sunday morning. We'll also hit some of the big ideas, some of the things that probably deserve a lot more time by themselves. That wasn't allowed for Sunday morning in the context of a sermon. And so we'll unpack some of the bigger ideas from Sunday, make sure we follow up on all those, and that's kind of the target. So we're going to start with this. There is a sense in which, culturally speaking, I think that there's a war on respect. I feel like, and I believe you guys, especially those of you who are older than me, can probably speak to this better than I can. But it seems to me like we live in a culture that is more and more comfortable with disrespect. I think our politics are a great example of one arena where we're seeing that, where it's much more comfortable. I recall a time when politically there was the debate about whether or not to run negative ads. Seems like there's not a debate about that anymore. Feels like we've just agreed that that's probably the best ad to run, and we just run those now, right? The whole tone and volume, the way in which our politicians speak, it's very different. But I think it's not just there. I don't think you can even blame them for being this way within our culture. I think it's more broad than that. I think that there's an overall more acceptance. I think social media plays a one of the things that just makes me bristle, makes me just kind of get upset, is when I see people write negative things about someone else on social media. And it bothers me because we were all taught that you're not supposed to say anything if you don't have anything nice to say. Remember that? But it's like we forgot, like if I'm typing it, I'm not saying it, I'm typing it. And no one ever taught me not to type anything unless I had something nice to say, right? And so social media is different. Politics, just all throughout culture, I see this, what I think Doc would even call a war on respect. It's one of the conversations we had.
A huge war. In fact, I think the social media is playing a huge role. Because on social media, you say things anonymously that you would never say to someone's face, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that has made people very comfortable. And so now they even name themselves and just speak the most awful things on social media. I see families spilling all of their family troubles online. You see people attacking each other online. At least if you say it to their face, you might get hit in the face, and there's a little bit of risk. It seems like on social media, it blocks all of the restraints. And I think our culture has become more awful. We are just a meaner people, I believe. That's my sense. You may feel differently. I don't know.
And with that, specifically, one of the things Doc and I have discussed is the what seems to be a lessening of respect specifically towards men. I can remember reading this in a book years ago. The Simpsons was a key TV show years and years ago because it put out this dad who was always the brunt end of the jokes. No matter whatever happens, Homer is always the one that gets made fun of. From a Christian perspective, I love the fact that his neighbor, Ned Flanders, is a joke in himself. Like he's always constantly made fun of. But there's been a pattern, right? Even within entertainment, you've seen it in a progression of sitcoms through the 80s and 90s, into the 2000s. If you're a father, if you're a man, if you're a dad, you're the one to be made fun of. You're the one who's constantly being spoken of as the one who doesn't deserve respect, the one who's always just kind of the example of stupidity or whatever else, okay? And, sometimes those shows hit a little too close to home, right? Some of them are a little too real. But there seems to be just this generic way in which the male figure, specifically the male father figure, has been denigrated within our society and our culture. And I don't blame it on this, but you also look again, one of the biggest epidemics taking place within our culture right now is fatherlessness. The amount of homes where children are being raised without fathers. It's a big, big deal. And so again, I think this goes back to the context of respect against even males.
Yeah, and I think you can see it in a couple of contexts very, very clearly. If you don't have to dig too far online. You might read about the red pill versus the blue pill, and that goes back to the Matrix, the two pills that are used there. But a red pill movement, part of which is going to tell you that men are not essential anymore, okay? That women can do very, very well without a guy, maybe even better in their life without a guy. And you can find very serious arguments for that online. You also see this to a large degree in education. I'd like, if you're in schools, I know that you're in schools, there is a war against boys being boys. Can you speak to that?
Yes, so I do, I feel really strongly about boys being able to be boys and being able to play outside and being able to do what God has created them to do. And there's a certain risk in being a boy and being able to fall off the monkey bars. You don't often very much see boys climbing trees anymore because, it is very scary as a mother, right, that your kid's going to fall out of the tree. However, there's a certain amount of risk that a boy has to take on as a young age, because then what that does, it helps their masculinity as they begin to grow up. And when you're teaching a room full of boys, sometimes what they need to do is they might need to jump their spelling words instead of write their spelling words, right? And so I definitely see this in schools.
Yeah, a lot of schools will almost medicate those boys who act like boys, rather than find ways to channel it. It's a real problem, I think.
I have a lot of books on that kind of subjects too, if you guys want anything about it. I've got a really great book about the boy and his growing brain. And when I was raising my sons, Michael Gurian is the author, and the book is fantastic, and it puts a biblical perspective into what's going on in your son's brain while he's trying to figure out who he is, and while you as the mother are like, can I just have one moment of peace, please?
Basically, masculine itself, it has become disrespected among many, many people, okay? Just the whole notion of the masculine has been disrespected, which is hard because I think the Bible teaches that a man doesn't feel loved unless he feels respected, which is one of those places that Ben is going to go.
I just had this idea. I've loved, you guys, some of you have known Doc for much longer than I have. And so there's these things that Doc does that I just find really fun and entertaining, all right? Because it's still new to me. One of the fun, entertaining things that he does is he calls children barbarians. And I like that. That just makes sense to me. He says you're raising little heathens, little barbarians that you're trying to teach how to be godly, right? But when you think of little children and barbarians, typically you think of little boys.
Sure.
They tend to be the more wild of the bunch. And within a civilized culture, we fall in that trap between trying to cause them to be civilized while also still letting them be man. And that's a complicated balance. Again, even as parents, we've walked through some of that as well. Like, it's tough. And yet you still want to create those risks, right? All of that, again, speaking to the fact that overall, I think respect is something that is diminishing in culture, specifically to men. But beyond that, it's just in context, within culture, within interacting with each other, respect is something that seems to be diminishing. And the problem is, especially even within a church context like this, one of the biggest problems we have is that, like everything else, it seems like Christians get swept up with it. And so because we just hear it in so many different places, we just get swept up into that being the normal way of living, the normal way of talking, okay? To the point that I would say, as much as, and I bring up politics as an example all the time because I just hate them. I hate politics. I hate all of it. I think they're all filthy, okay? What bothers me is to hear Christians speaking negatively about a politician. They might be right, but there's still that aspect of disrespect, right? Like, we've become so comfortable with disrespect that we will speak disrespectfully in ways that we know we're probably crossing lines. Does that make sense? Right? And so, again, I think we just kind of get swept up in the stuff. It just becomes normal for us.
And let me jump onto that one too. I think he's dead on right as far as the way we are disrespectful outside of these walls. One of the ways that I see it terribly inside the church is that I think there's an epidemic of disrespect between husbands and wives. It's terrible. Our husbands and wives are killing each other because they do not default to respect, they default to disrespect. And again, I'm going to make the statement, if a man doesn't feel respected, he cannot feel loved. And I know a whole lot of ladies who are going to say, but I do respect my husband. And if you ask the husband, he's going to say, no, I'm not respected. And they're both telling you the truth. That's the mystery of this thing. Because sometimes what a wife perceives as respect and what a husband perceives as respect are miles apart. And if you don't get that, you'll kill each other. Okay? It's going to happen.
And that's the very next point where we're going to go to, was this focus on the necessity of receiving. We talked about love the first week. And then last week we sat in here and we talked about love, and we talked about how, and we gave my example of, I thought by doing chores around the house, or even by groping my wife, that I was showing her love, right? Because those are the ways that I receive love.
So embarrassing.
I thought that if I could do that, did I embarrass you?
Just a little. I think that one of the things about respect for me as a young wife, especially, I mean, it's my tone of voice in how I speak to Ben, and I don't even recognize that in myself. And it's kind of like when you're teaching your children, like, hey, you can't talk to mommy like that. Well, why not? Well, because it sounds like this. And for Ben, I had to ask, I respect you. I think it's so great. You're bringing home the money for our family. I get to stay home and raise the kids. And he'd be like, but the way that you asked me to help make the bottle made me feel like an idiot. It was the way in which I spoke to you at home. That was the hardest, I think.
And it goes back to this, the ways we receive it. Oftentimes we think husbands, we're making an act of love towards our wife. She doesn't receive that as an act of love, okay? Oftentimes, wives, I think you make an act of respect towards your husband. You're intentionally trying to be respectful to him, but it's done in a way that isn't received as respect. In those situations, if it's not in a way that I'm receiving respect, it's not really respect. If it's not in a way in which she feels love, then it's not really love. Does that make sense? And that's one of the big pieces of this, because oftentimes, as Doc said, oftentimes if you sit down with a couple, they'll say, oh no, I am respecting them, or oh no, I am loving them. Look at all these things I do. This proves this. And the problem is, on the opposite side of it, if you aren't feeling it, if you're not receiving that respect, receiving that love in that specific way, then it's not really love or respect.
Well, and I think this goes, if you're not receiving love and receiving respect, it's difficult to communicate with each other about that too.
Yep.
And so then you're missing on all aspects.
There's the book that we read through. I know you're familiar with it, the book Love and Respect. So it's specifically titled These Two Things, focused on this passage and the needs of a husband and the needs of a wife, and how a wife needs to feel loved, a man needs to feel respected. And he calls it the crazy cycle. Am I right?
Yes.
Okay. And so he talks about what happens is a husband will not show love to his wife, upsets her, so she responds by not showing respect to him. It turns back into not love back to her, not respect back to him, and it just spirals out of control, right? Whereas the way you break that is someone has to stop it. Someone has to choose I'm going to love, or someone has to choose I'm going to respect, and try to start it back, because I'm better at loving her when I feel respected. And she's better at respecting me when I love her.
Well,
Does that
it
make
goes
sense?
back to last week where you then pick up the towel and begin serving the other person
Yeah.
unselfishly.
Yeah. Bellany, what you got?
I was just thinking that sometimes, I would guess from a woman's perspective, the guy doesn't really deserve respect. And from the guy's perspective, sometimes the woman's just not that terribly lovable at the moment. So, giving
never happened.
respect is like nurturing. You need to give it to folks regardless. Sometimes, a lot of times it doesn't need to be earned, it just needs to be given.
That's one of the things I said Sunday morning, and we're going to get to that some more. We'll talk about that some more here in a little bit. But one of the big things refrains that you heard me say Sunday morning was that our respect to our wife, or our respect from a wife to a husband, our respect to anybody, again, because we're commanded to respect beyond just this specific relationship, okay? Our respect is commanded, and it's not an optional thing, and it's not a contingent thing. It's not dependent on them deserving it. Okay? In one sense, I can make the argument they don't deserve it. Okay? Every single person has failed. Everyone's messed up. No one really deserves your respect. Okay? On the other end, there isn't anybody who doesn't deserve your respect, because we're all made in that image of God. Again, we're going to come back to that. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But you're right. I think that's one of the problems is we withhold respect, or we withhold love, because we think that they've done something to break their deserving it. They haven't earned it. And that's a nasty trap to get into, especially in the context of a marriage. That's really dangerous. Anything else on that, Doc?
No,
Okay. All right. Let's define disrespect. Okay? You got something to say? Nope? Okay, all right. We're going to define disrespect, okay? And this is really simple. Like, seriously, I went to Google and typed in, give me examples of disrespect, okay? And most of these that I found are actually in a workplace environment, okay? So when you think about a workplace environment, again, we're going to be sensitive and gentle here, all right? We're not trying to just throw women under the bus for how they treat their husbands, okay? But what we're saying is we recognize what disrespect looks like in all sorts of different contexts, okay? And so it looks like ignoring, so blowing someone off, not paying attention to them. It looks like nagging, belittling, being critical, shaming, or condescending comments, okay? All of those kind of have a speaking aspect to it. So ways in which you speak down to. That's one that we've struggled with, because quite frankly, she's an authority figure. She's an authority all day long with my children. She now works in a school. She's an authority all day long with students. And it's hard to just switch that off, right? I come in the door and she's used to saying things a certain way and getting the results she wants. And so there's times when I walk in, I'm like, hey, I'm not your kid. I'm not one of your students. Let's work on that, all right? Right? And so those are those things, right? We want to make sure that the way in which we're speaking, not in that condescending kind of a way. It can look like underappreciating. It can look like the tone, or not just the words that we use, but the ways we communicate physically. There's ways that we communicate physically. Probably the top way that I disrespect my wife is the facial expressions I use whenever we're in a more tense conversation, okay? It's the expressions of the face and the body and the way in which we present ourselves and communicate in that way. I thought you were getting ready to say something.
Well, I was thinking about how you're not super expressive, so they're like, yeah, right.
Okay. But am I super expressive?
Yes.
Yeah. All right, there we go. Yeah, that's good. Okay, it can be angry or rude outbursts, even threats, okay? Think of it in that kind of context. Interrupting, that's probably one of the things that drives me the most crazy, and it's not even just her. My children drive me nuts with this. And they're too old for this, like they should know better, okay? But my wife and I don't have a whole lot of time to just sit together and talk. And inevitably, whenever we finally get that opportunity where we're quiet and we're trying to, whether it's like business, almost a business meeting, we're trying to run through all the stuff we have to talk about, or whether we're actually just connecting to each other's heart and having a good conversation, my 14-year-old son will interrupt every 3 minutes. And if you aren't talking to him, if nothing important's happening, he is content. He's distracting himself. There's no issues. But as soon as I start talking to her and something important's going on, he doesn't know how to stay out of the space. Drives me nuts. Am I wrong?
No.
Okay, all right, good. Good. Doc, you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I got a couple things on this one here. When you're looking at different ways, you mentioned tone here. I don't know how many times one partner will say to the other partner something, and the words and the tone don't match, okay? And if you challenge them, they'll say, but I said, and they'll quote the words. It has nothing to do with the words. Did you know most of what you communicate is not in the words that you choose? Most of what you communicate is in your body language and your tone. Disrespect often, when you'll say something that sounds respectful in a disrespectful way. That's disrespect. Does that make sense to you guys? Tone of voice, body language, those things are huge. And
It's kind of like the truth and grace thing.
absolutely.
You can say truth, but if you say it in a hurtful way, it's not very graceful, then it's not really of Jesus.
Another way that I can see that I would add to this list, have you ever listened to one partner compare their partner to some other person? Compare their husband to another guy who's more skilled at something than her husband is, right? Or some husband who compares his wife to someone who has, some woman who in some way is better than his wife. Comparison in that kind of a context is a killer in a relationship. It's very, very disrespectful. Does that make sense? Another thing that I look at is that oftentimes it is magnified. It's bad enough when you are disrespectful to each other alone, when you are disrespectful to each other in front of others. Okay? That's a killer. I listen sometimes to the tone of voice with which partners speak to each other in my presence or in someone else's presence. Okay? And that's going to cause that person who's being disrespected to wither doubly. Does that make sense? Now I'm being humiliated, just not by my partner, but I'm being humiliated in front of other people. The whole idea that you would scold in some fashion your partner in front of your kids, in front of your friends, that's horrific. It is sin. Does that make sense? One of the ways that couples just are terribly disrespectful is the way they talk to each other in front of their children. Okay? That's a height of disrespect. One other that Ben mentioned a little bit when we were talking about the interrupting, basically the reason that interrupting is disrespectful is because you're not listening. Okay? Not listening. I hear a lot of conversations in which people are not listening to each other. They're just waiting for the other person to take a breath so they can get their thoughts in. And they don't actually respond to what's being said. They're just waiting for their opportunity to speak. When you're with a spouse and you're not listening, that is disrespectful. Even if you disagree, it's disrespectful. Now, I know that sometimes a spouse can simply drone on for a long time and never give you an opening, and you probably do need to interrupt. The diatribe isn't respectful either. If you're not willing to respect your partner or let them make their point known, that's just abusive. Okay?
Abusive seems kind of harsh.
Anyway, just a few things to the list. Just so many different ways that we do this that you don't think about. It's not just a matter of just calling each other a name. Sometimes just the way you say, I love you, can be disrespectful.
We're,
Does that make sense?
and it's easy. We're actually really good at it.
Oh,
This is
I'm-
the,
I'm amazing at it.
yeah.
I'm good.
It's like, this is like the factory settings are disrespect. It's harder to be respectful. It's easy to be disrespectful. That's the, just fall back and do what comes natural and feels easy. It's going to be disrespectful. Good. All right. Let's talk about this. We've already kind of brought it up a little bit. When we talk about respect, is it something that you give or is it something that you earn? Talked a lot about this over the last week, looking at this sermon. We've had some different debates and conversations. Doc and I have had it in multiple settings, different groups. Our tendency, the way that we act, and again, I think this is heavily culture and worldly, okay? But the way we tend to look at it is that people get respect when they've earned it. They do something to prove themselves. They do something to earn it. And so we have, in a culture right now, we have police officers that are not necessarily respected because there's some who have done something wrong that have broken trust between a community and their officers. And so now the standard is I don't trust you because now you have to prove you deserve it. Does that make sense? There's no honoring of the badge or the position. It's now you have to earn it. Okay, that's a dangerous place to be as a society. All right? Even with the fact that some have misused their authority and have offended the badge, right? Okay? It's a dangerous place to be where you have positions of authority. I see it in politics as much as you may not like who the president is or anybody else for local or any other state government, whatever it may be, there's a position there that deserves respect, right? The role and authority, the position that they have, that's something significant as well. Our tendency is to think that you have to earn it. You have to do something well with it. And at the same time, we feel like we always deserve respect. We always feel like everyone should be respecting me because I'm great. All right? Like I've done everything right, so everyone should respect me. It's an interesting double standard. We talked about that Sunday.
Let me jump on that one real quick, Ben.
Okay.
When you go on this notion that you have to earn respect, basically that means I get to define what respect looks like for you. You understand that? Okay? Because a person might, you haven't earned my respect. Well, I've been decent. Well, not to my standards. You start thinking about it. If you have to earn respect, you set yourself as the judge and the arbiter of what respect looks like in your context, right? You don't value what the other person believes about that sort of thing. And we're not just talking about that. We're talking about there are some positions that are just established by God. I think Ben's going to get here in just a second, but when he says honor your parents, respect your parents, you can put it either way you want. It doesn't say respect your parents when they deserve it, right? And there are many, every parent deserves disrespect. Every one of us, okay? We also deserve some respect, but if you're talking about earning it, all of us have failed to earn it at some point. Have you ever disciplined your child badly? Any of you? Any of you ever disciplined your child and discovered you were wrong? Okay? If your hand's not up, you're a liar.
I raised mine, did you?
Yeah,
Either to yourself
no, I didn't raise mine.
or to us, one or the other. We all mess up as parents. Any of you who looks back and say, I did everything right as a parent, means that you're just not you're not reflective. Okay? And so, still, you look at your parent, been given that position by God. You don't have to agree with everything they do. You can still treat a person you disagree with respect, can't you? Isn't that possible?
Well, and again, this is where we see some conflict. If you're a Jesus follower, what we're saying applies to you. If you don't care anything about Jesus, go on about your life. All right, go on and do what you're going to do. But if Jesus has any authority in your life, what he's spoken is you're going to respect. That's the expectations, that you're going to give respect. And then he gives us a list. So he talks about parents, which Doc already mentioned, right? So there's an expectation that children would honor and respect their father and mother. If we have time at the end, we'll talk a little bit about the difference between respect and honor.
This is my
Same
favorite.
kind of word. Okay, yeah, we'll get to there, Doc. Wait for it. All right? That's right. But did you notice, we'll go ahead and go there now. Did you notice that because you walked in late, and when you walked in, nobody stood to show you respect? Oh, man. I'm sorry of how disrespected you were. That's rough. I'll work with them on it, okay?
Single tear.
Yeah. Yeah. This is the most emotional I've ever seen, Doc, right here. Right? Okay? There's a sense within culture we say you should respect those who are before you, your parents, your grandparents. Obviously, that kind of stuff is there. But again, there's nothing about optionality to it. There's nothing contingent on it. It's commands. If Jesus is your Lord and Savior, then these are the things that we do. We respect. That's it. All right? There's not a whole lot of room for debate. It's not about anything else.
And it's interesting on this one too, that this is another one of those places where culture has shifted, where essentially the elderly are not respected by default in our culture in a lot of different ways. You agree with that? Okay. I think it's ubiquitous.
You think you've seen a big shift in that over the years?
Yes,
Like how? Give some examples.
a big shift.
Okay. Are you?
I think, man, I'm not old, so I'm not sure I can speak from experience. But I think the idea that you respected older folks, speak to them in such a fashion, give up your seat for them, that sort of thing was trained pretty hard when I was younger. Mm-hmm. Okay? Now, those of you who are really old, you can speak to it and find out if I'm wrong. But I think that there really is right now almost a disdain, because with age, you get left behind in so many different things in our culture. How many of you old guys can't handle the internet like your grandkids? Okay? How many of you were laughed at by your grandkids? Okay? The pace of change in our culture is so fast, okay, that as you get old, you get behind in so many things. And those who are younger and are skilled at those things look at you with disdain too often, right?
One of the things I thought of with this was, I think there was a time in culture where the elderly were seen as a responsibility of the family. And so as they got older, you saw family kind of surround and care for and provide and meet their needs. That seems to be something that we pass off more and more now through nursing homes, assisted care, whatever else. But to me, I think that's a sign of it in a certain sense. I know that's not true in every circumstance, but there's enough examples of that to where I think it's easier for people to just pass someone off on a different place.
And this is a real cultural shift from the biblical times, both Old and New Testament. Old and New Testament, a lot of the aged were almost revered. Disrespect was almost a capital offense. It was very, very serious. In fact, even some of that's one of the reasons that in the churches, the synagogues, you wanted the older, more mature to lead. If you look at things like the Dead Sea Scrolls, when you look at the Essene community, you weren't fit to go to spiritual war until you were old. The young simply were not capable of doing that. It's an entirely different perspective on age. And so there has been not just a cultural shift within our time, there's a huge cultural shift. You go from Bible times to our time.
We also see it with God. Malachi 1, we referenced this Sunday, but I love this. God asks, a son honors his father, a servant honors his master. I'm a father, I'm a master. Where's my honor? Where's my respect that's due me? Again, same kind of expectation. If you're not a Jesus follower, it doesn't apply to you. But if you call Jesus Lord and Savior, there ought to be a certain respect of God that you have, you would think. And then you have these, which are really fun to put up next to each other. Ephesians 5:33, which is the much more common passage that gets quoted more frequently. The wife must respect her husband. But then you've got this other one, 1 Peter 3. Husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives and treat them with respect, which I think is important. Okay, we don't always make a big deal about that one. And I made mention of this Sunday, but I think it's very interesting that Peter would make a big deal about this in chapter 3, when just a few verses before that, he says, show proper respect to everyone. It's almost as if he has to say that includes your wives. They're also part of everyone. You show respect to everyone. But then he lists there in the 1 Peter passage, love the brotherhood of believers, fear God, honor the king. Different ways that respect is played out in the different kind of relationships that are around us. It's a commanded thing. Again, none of these are optional. None of these are contingent. Giving respect is an obligation. It's not a favor. It's not, when you respect someone, you're not doing them a favor. You're not doing something special for them. It's something for you. You're doing something significant. And I think that's really, like, for me, it's a big deal because it makes me ask this question: what do I get when I give respect to someone? What do I get out of it? Why is this focused on me being the one who's giving it? What's the benefit for me, right? It goes to this: when I respect, I'm practicing becoming more like Jesus. That's what's really going on. It's a spiritual discipline. It's something that we're working on in that kind of a context. Doc, you got any thoughts on that? No? Okay. This all goes back to, for me, this language about marriage is the gymnasium of the soul. That when I'm working on respecting, I'm working on me. It's not about someone else, it's about me. I'm working on becoming more and more like Jesus. I'm developing the skills of what it looks like to be a righteous person, a holy person, someone who's going to live and look and act like Jesus. I'm changing. I'm shaping myself. It's an internal shift that's taking place.
Let me jump in on that one, though, Ben. The key phrase that you used was that learning to be more and more like Jesus. Think about Jesus in these kind of contexts, okay? Now, Jesus could get really hard on people. There were times he was brutally rough on some people who were leading people astray religiously. You know, he might call them a brood of vipers, right? But one of the things that you see in Jesus constantly is his ability to look at people who were ordinarily disrespected and to treat them with a decency that no one else could figure out, right? The people who were marginal, women and children, women in a lot of those areas that were almost property. They didn't matter. And Jesus treated them with a tremendous amount of respect. Children, they're to stay out of the way, not to speak. Jesus treated them with far more, he treated them with value. Sinners, you know, you have the woman at the well, the Samaritan, who had just gone from man to man to man. The woman who was sinful, that was kneeling down and washing his feet. Everyone else wanted her out of the room, and Jesus treated her with respect. Jesus had the ability, and this is what I think is going on, he was able to see beyond what they were to the image of God in them. He could see what they were meant to be, what they could be. He treated them as they were meant to be, treated them as they could be. Now that didn't mean he didn't challenge sin, because he did that just fiercely, challenge sin. But even the people whose sin he challenged, I mean, he tells Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." He calls him Satan, right? Valued him so, just he was precious to him. But Jesus was able to see beyond what you are to what God made you to be, right? And so he knows that you're special. When we were talking about this a little bit, I contrasted it with one of the things that you find in what's the group that values animals more than they value people?
PETA.
PETA, one of the founders of PETA, who said a rat is a pig, is a dog, is a boy. A rat is a pig, is a dog, is a boy. They're all of equal value. Okay? Nonsense. Jesus, the Creator, identified humans as in the image of God, the only ones in the image of God. And animals in that time were sacrificed for our sins. You know, this whole idea that he sees you as different. You know, he doesn't look at you the same way as he looks at your cat. You're special.
Because cats are demons, but yeah. It's because cats are demons.
That is exactly
Yes.
right. I shouldn't have used cat. That was a bad example.
Yeah, that was a bad example. But what was really interesting, several of those stories you mentioned, like the woman who's pouring perfume on his feet, the children who came to Jesus. What's interesting is in several of those occasions, Jesus rebukes the people who try to get in the way of it. And so we talk about him respecting people who were used to being disrespected, and then he would call people out who wanted to maintain that disrespect. I think that's very significant, looking in all those kinds of ways. It absolutely goes back to that image of God stuff. For me, this is a lot like our conversation about love. We mentioned that Sunday morning. We're told that we're supposed to love everybody. As a follower of Jesus, I'm supposed to love everyone. An aspect of love is respecting. You can't make a good argument for how you're loving someone if you're disrespecting them. Respect is one of the ways that we love, okay? And so they go hand in hand. Anything else on that one? You good? Okay. All right. Maybe one of the more controversial things I said on Sunday, and if you want to argue, here's the time, okay? We'll open it up. We'll see if you guys have something to say to this. I asked the question, but I kind of also asserted that I think this, all right? Is it easy or natural? These things that were commanded in Ephesians chapter 5, where Paul tells husbands, you need to love your wives, and he says, wives, you need to respect your husbands. I think that he's communicating something to men and women that is not natural or easy for them to do, which is why he has to tell them to do it, okay? He's communicating something to them that is not second nature for them, all right? It's not easy for them to just pour out of their lives, all right? And so we talked some about the stereotypes of men and women. They're stereotypes. I know they're stereotypes. I know that they're not true for every man. What I say here doesn't necessarily mean that every man is exactly this way. But generally speaking, men are not great at loving their wife. I think that's true. I've seen evidence of it in all sorts of different ways, okay? At least when we talk about the way in which a wife would feel love.
That's the key, I think.
Going back to that definition, that way that we started before. I think most men think that they're doing things that are loving for their wife, but it's not really a way in which she feels loved. And we can go further. We can talk about men being unemotional. We can talk about men struggling with communication. These are generally true of just about every man, right? Generally true. Most men struggle with valuing something over the context of their relationships, whether that's work, whether that's a hobby, whether that's their own friends, whatever else, okay? Most men have some sort of a struggle in one of those spaces. Too many men are too comfortable with putting too little effort into understanding their wives. They think that if they just kind of check off the list of what they have to do, that somehow love exists and the relationship's going to be good. I think that's true of most men. I think that when I look at our marriage and the struggles that we've had, the times when my wife has not received the love that she deserves to receive, it's been more my issue than her issue. It's that I'm not loving her in a way that she feels loved. And it's usually because what's natural to me is a list of things that don't feel like love to her. Does that make sense? Do you think that's fair?
There's another piece of this. And again, these are stereotypes. Ben is right when he said, you're going to find exceptions to every single one of these things. But we tend to love in the way that we want to be loved, okay? And the way I want to be loved is not the same way that Julie wants to be loved. So I will love her in the way that I am comfortable in loving her. That doesn't mean she's going to feel loved by me. Does that make sense? And if you ask me, do you love her? Well, of course I do. And I'll make my case.
You have evidence to prove it.
I got all kinds of evidence to prove it. All right? And I can lay out that evidence, and Julie's not going to buy it. Does that make sense? And she will love me in the way that she wants to be loved. I told the story the other day, and it really is true, about when Julie bought me flowers, right? And I laughed at her, which was a stupid mistake, I discovered, okay? But it was precious to her when I would remember to bring her flowers. That's not something that even registers in my brain, right? It's important to her that I remember dates. I don't care about remembering dates. But if I don't remember dates, she doesn't feel respected and loved. I don't care about dates. I expect someone to tell me if something is coming up that is important. But I can make my case that I love you, but if I don't tick off the things that she finds important, she's not going to feel loved by me. Does that make sense? And vice versa.
Yeah.
Precisely vice versa. A lady's going to say, but I've shown you my love in all these different ways, but none of those are the kind of things that really make me feel loved, right?
Bellamy, what do you have?
There was a comment made that this goes back to the 5 love languages.
That's a piece of it. It's not identical, but it's a piece of it, right?
Right, and it's just another way of acknowledging that people expect and receive love in different ways, and it needs to be provided in whatever way it can best be accepted. I mean, you can look back a few generations and the stereotypical, she should know, he should know. You could get away with that at some point, but that's just emotional laziness.
The reason I challenged it a little bit is that love languages has the same basic idea, but this idea is built more on the premise that there is a fundamental difference in the way that God created a male and a female. Love languages can go either direction, either group, but there are tendencies for men to love a certain way, women to love a certain way, and it isn't received the same way it's delivered. And that's not based on love languages, that's just based on gender.
Yeah.
Okay?
Well,
So it's a little difference.
My excuse is I'm not bilingual.
Did you have something you want to say? You looked at me like you had something to say.
No, I'm good. No.
One of the things, I don't know if this is where your mind went.
Well, I was thinking a lot of things.
Yeah, this is a lot of things. One of the great tortures and pains in our relationship is that Christina's birthday falls October 9th.
Yep,
Is that where
that's
you
what I
were
was-
thinking?
yep.
I thought so. I can see it in your eyes. October 9th is a fine day, except that that's usually very close, if not the exact day that Texas plays Oklahoma. All right? Every year. They play each other either the second or third Saturday of October every year at the Texas State Fair. It's a whole big deal. It means a lot to me. It's maybe my favorite holiday, okay? And so I make a big deal about that weekend. And on those years where it falls in line with her birthday,
I get left behind.
she typically is second. And she's a good sport. She's really great. She plays on. It's become a family thing, all right? And so it's not like I just blow off the whole family to do my own thing. We kind of do something together. She's been a good sport about it.
I don't understand why it bothers you.
I knew
Yep.
I was up here to be the scapegoat. That's right.
Yep.
Yeah.
There we go. So
I
again,
realized so one of the things about dates that I was thinking, I get really upset that he forgets my birthday. I do. It makes me upset. Let's not forget that. But I forget our anniversary all the time. And that shows how selfish I am in the marriage.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great
that's
point.
what I was thinking.
That is on camera. I'm going to need to record this session, make sure that I have that readily available as
Gave
needed.
me a present one time with our anniversary on the bracelet so that I would know.
She's not great with dates,
No.
except her birthday.
Except my
She's
birthday.
got that one locked
It is
down.
October 9th, Ben.
Yes, it is.
Every year.
Every year. Hasn't changed yet. All right. Along with this, okay, so we talked a lot about the men. The flip side of this is that there's stereotypes about women too. And it's not as easy or comfortable, at least for me to talk about, right? But it seems as if, generally speaking, women have a hard time respecting their husbands. I think there's evidence. I think there's science to prove it. I think that you can go back to the Genesis account of the fall and what takes place and the relationship between the husband and the wife and what shifts. I think you can see that through the context of the New Testament. I think you can see it in the context of current culture, everything else. It is a hard thing, I think, for most women to respect their husbands. And I hope that you wouldn't take any offense to that any more so than me saying that your husbands are awful at loving. All right, like we all struggle with something. We're trying to work on something here. I think that when Paul addresses these two things specifically, he's speaking to a very real thing that exists. I don't think that he just pulled love out of the air for husbands. I don't think he just pulled respect out of the air for wives. I think he's speaking directly to something that deserves our attention, and our focus.
And again on this one, remember,
It's ways in which he
for a wife
feels
to
loved.
respect her husband in a way that he feels respected.
Yeah.
That line has to be attached to it, okay? Because if you ask a husband if he loves his wife, well, of course he does, and he'll give you his evidence. Does he love her in a way that she feels loved? Not always. If you ask the wife, do you respect your husband? She'll always tell you yes. Usually will tell you yes. If you ask the husband whether he feels respected, oftentimes he'll have a very, very different answer. They're both telling the truth. That's the key. Both of them think they're telling the truth, and so they get into a fight. I do too, and you do not. I do too, you do not, right? It's because she respects him in a way that she feels is respecting. It's not the way that he yearns for respect. And so, in a marriage, you're learning to deal decently with a creature who's very different than you are. And it's not just about what you like to do and are comfortable doing. If it's going to be successful, you have to try to understand how they respond. And part of what you do is just learn your spouse. If you don't try to learn your spouse, you don't take your marriage. I mean, you look at people who are studying for a test to become an expert in anything, and they study hard, right? People don't study their spouses, and it's the toughest of all relationships. It's the toughest of all things to do. If you want a strong marriage, try to understand each other, as hard as that is. It's hard, because we're different. But that's what this whole thing is about. Try to understand them, and try to respond in such a fashion that they feel loved and respected. Not that you think you've given love and respect, that they feel loved and respected. It'll make a world of difference.
We're going to say something?
Right about this part then.
Yeah, that's what I was going to do. I was going to lead right into the next slide, what you're talking about. Sunday morning, we talked about the 5 keys to showing respect in a marriage. And the first one we talked about was changing your thinking. And it's not anything outside of understand, study your spouse. Husbands, you should study your spouse well enough to know how she feels loved so that you can show her love in a way that she can feel. That is your responsibility. It's just because you're bad at it doesn't mean you sit back and say, well, I don't know, I can't figure it out. No, figure it out. You married her, figure it out. Figure out how she feels loved. Ask her, she'll probably tell you. Write it down because you'll forget, okay? But figure it out, study
Birthday
it.
parties.
Work on, what, birthday parties, that's right. Hey, I nailed it. I did a surprise party for her one year, and I feel like it got me out of 2 or 3 bad birthdays on Texas, Oklahoma Day, because I did so well, didn't I? Yeah, okay, all right, but study them, know them, understand them. It goes the opposite way in respect. Wives, if you want to know how you can respect your husbands more, study them. Change your thinking. Try to understand them. Try to get into their head and figure out what makes them click, what makes them move.
On that also, though, I think you have to change your inner monologue. We're women, we are constantly thinking and going. We're taking care of our kids. We're taking care of our job. What do we need to do? I need my husband to be healthy. I want my kids to be healthy. We need to go on a walk. And you're going all the time in your mind. And for me, the only times that I get this right, I think, are when I change my inner monologue about him. And so I have to change how I think about him and the things that I'm saying to myself about him, because it begins to come out in my speech, in the way that I even talk to my kids about my husband, and it hurts and it's damaging, just like what you were saying. And the ways that I can do this correctly is when in my mind I'm like, man, that was so nice that he did this today. Wow, he made the bed today. That was amazing. And it is, right? Okay? But little things all the way to the big things. I have to change my inner monologue about him in my heart.
And understanding the differences can be real strange. I mean, a lot of guys, for example, okay, they need to make a trip to Lowe's. And they said, would you come with me? No, I'm busy. Okay? Seems like a little thing, doesn't it? Happens over and over and over again. And he wants her with him. And you're thinking, why? I'm busy, I've got things to do. taking care of my own stuff. Stuff like that, little tiny things. When you realize that in some respects, that's one of the ways that your husband feels valued, respected, and loved. Okay? Little stuff.
So it truly is watching a football game with him sometimes.
Sometimes.
Gosh.
Preach it, Doc.
That's almost the height of respect.
Yeah, it is. It's a high level respect. Christina watches sports with me during college basketball tournament, and she'll watch a Red River rivalry, the Texas-Oklahoma game. And she usually is TV adjacent during the Super Bowl somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really don't even like the commercials.
I was going to point out that I'm such a bad husband that when I make the bed, it makes her day. Like that was a significant
what I was
thing.
saying about that,
Little
the
peek
only
into
thing
our
I was saying
relationship.
about that was, it's the little things sometimes that you do, you
Yeah.
know? It's the little things build up. They either build up in your mind that it was a little problem, you said no to going to Lowe's. No, thank you, I don't want to go. And then it builds. So little things can build and become huge. And either it's going to be a massive molehill, or whatever, how does that say? A massive mountain? I don't know. But it becomes something that
It turns
is-
a molehill into a mountain.
Yeah, that.
Yeah, that one. Yeah.
I'm
Bellamy,
sorry,
what do you
I
got?
teach. I've been talking all day.
We're talking about analyzing, studying your spouse, which is awesome and should be mandatory. But in doing so, we've got to be careful, or at least I've got to be careful, not to tend towards what I think the answer should be. You sort of mentioned that, or you did mention that earlier, but the best thing to do is not determine how she or he should respond, but watch how they actually do respond to your intentionally doing this or that. And that'll give you a better clue anyway as to where the mark is you're trying to hit.
Yeah. And Christina mentioned the inner dialogue. Several of these have to do with that. So when you think about the change your standards, and you're moving from holding them accountable to a higher standard and giving yourself a pass, you're changing your standards to where you're going to see the benefit, you're going to see the good of them. You're looking to intentionally find the good things about your spouse while you're being truthful about yourself. I'm very nervous about this one because I'm terrified that a woman would hear you need to be self-deprecating. And I don't mean that by any means. That's not humility. Self-deprecation isn't humility. Humility is right perspective, seeing yourself accurately. And so what that means is recognizing I also have flaws, I also have failures, and I'm going to see my husband in his best light, and I'm going to be truthful about myself. Okay? That's all we're looking for here. Not as self-deprecation. No, I don't want women to think that we're trying to tell you have to be mousy and quiet and only see your bad parts, okay? Not going there. We're saying let's just be truthful, let's be honest, and then let's be positive towards our spouse. That's an act of respect. Not to suggest also that of all the flaws I have, you don't have a right to point them out to me or have those conversations. You can have those conversations, you need to have those conversations, but the respect is the thing that has to be maintained.
I think one of the things, if we want to change the culture and shift of respect, it's going to start in the home. And it's going to start with how the mother and father are talking to each other. And then also, they're watching. Like I have 17, 15-year-old, and a 14-year-old, and they are watching how I am speaking to him. And they're watching you. Your grandkids are watching you. They're listening to how you talk to your daughter or your daughter-in-law about your son-in-law. And if you want to be respected, let them hear you being respectful also. And I think oftentimes we forget that because you're at home, I can let my guard down, I'm just gonna spew all these things I've been thinking, and the damage is getting done little by little by little.
Let me give you a kind of a perspective for that. How many of you guys who are dads have had a daughter that you've had to marry off to some jerk? I mean, every twit that marries our daughters is a jerk, right? I'm just telling you, okay? It's just the way it is. Have you ever wanted to have you ever watched someone mistreat your daughter, or husband mistreat your daughter, or boyfriend mistreat your daughter, and you just want to take them out, right? Ever had that kind of a sense? I hope you have. Okay, it's important, right? Now put it, because you're married to God's daughter. Okay? If you're a lady, you're married to God's boy. What do you think God feels like when a man disrespects his daughter, his girl, his little one? Because I know that Alethea is more precious to God than she is to me, as hard as that is for me to understand. Right? And if Andy gets disrespect, I know that God holds Andy with more concern than I do, which is hard for me to understand. You're married to God's kid, right? If we could only convince ourselves of that, not just image of God, it's God's child. It would change a whole lot in the way that we treat each other. Okay?
We're past time. We talked about these on Sunday morning. We hit those. There shouldn't be anything too new here. But with attitude, we're talking about thankfulness. When you're thankful for something, it's really hard to criticize it. That's just a standard thing. Husbands, be thankful for your wife. You'll criticize them less. Wives, be thankful for your husband. You'll criticize them less. You'll be more respectful just naturally. You speak well of the things that you're thankful for. So find ways to be thankful for your spouse. And it shouldn't be that hard. You married them. All right? You saw something in them at some point. You ought to be able to find something to be thankful for them. Change your memory. That was a huge one this Sunday that we talked about that would have been fun to unpack, but we don't have time. But just that big idea that we're broken people in a broken world. Remember that. Don't remember all the ways that they failed. Remember the fact that we're broken in a broken world and we're going to fail. Okay? It's again part of that standard shifting and changing how we see things. And then eventually changing actions, stuff like complimenting them in public, affirming their gifts and their abilities, celebrating their accomplishments, expressing appreciation. Okay? Those kinds of things go a long ways towards building respect. Those are ways I think where men and women are the same. Doing those kinds of things make people feel respected. Make sure, though, again, we're checking, we're seeing, we're studying our spouse, men and women. We're studying to figure out what it is that makes them feel loved. What is it that makes them feel respected? That's what's most important.
And the last one that I just wanted to tack onto this, because I know we're out of time, but one real big piece on this. If your spouse walks into your workplace, okay, when the people around you look at your spouse, are they jealous of you or do they pity you? Okay? Have you spoken of your spouse in such a fashion that they wish that their husband was as good as yours? Because you've not spilled dirt on your partner in the office place, but you've spoken highly of them. Both happen. I'm telling you, if you walk into the workplace of your spouse and people look at you and shake their head, it'll wither your relationship, right? No. It's not just about being grateful to your spouse. Speak well of your spouse to others.
Can I speak to that for 1 second, real quick? When we were first married, I really recognize that we're out of time, but when we were first married, I would call my mom often, and I would tell her what I thought, I could tell her about my husband, and mainly about the fights and all the ways that he was driving me crazy. And one day she said something back at me about him, and I go, "Do you not like him?" And she said, "I don't know why you think I would. Every single thing you say to me about him is negative and bad. Do you like him?" And that was, I hung up on her. That's also disrespectful and rude. And then, but that has stuck with me. The actions and the way in which you speak about your husband to those most special to you, your own mom, your sister, it speaks volumes to them.
All right. Her mom and I get along really well, okay? We're good friends. No one fret, all right? We're good. As soon as we could get rid of the problem and the community, it's been super smooth, all right? It's been great. I appreciate that. All right. Thanks, guys, for joining us. Let me pray for us and we'll close out. God, I thank you so much for this night again. Thank you so much for my wife and what a blessing and an encouragement she is to me. God, I thank you that you've blessed us with relationships, even if it's outside of marriage. God, you've blessed us with people in our lives that mean something to us. And we've been called to love them and to respect them. And when we do that, it brings you glory and honor. And so, God, I pray that you would put that as a priority for us, man and woman, husband, wife, friend, child, parent, whoever that relationship might be. God, may we be known as a people who love and respect. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.